Marcus Chen sat in the back row of advanced physics, his scarred hands folded carefully on the desk. At 17, he looked like any other student from a distance, but up close, the differences were stark. His eyes moved constantly, scanning exits and potential threats. His posture remained rigid, ready to spring into action. 3 months ago, he had been commanding a squad of veteran soldiers against the Catherian invasion fleet. Now, he was supposed to care about momentum equations. "Mr. Chen, perhaps you'd like to solve this problem?" Mrs. Patterson's voice cut through his wandering thoughts. Marcus looked up at the whiteboard, where a complex physics equation sprawled across the surface. The other students turned to stare at him, their faces a mix of curiosity and barely concealed fear. Everyone knew who he was. The youngest human ever to receive the Galactic Medal of Valor. The kid who had held the line at Proxima Station while the evacuation ships escaped. "The particle will reach maximum velocity at 47.3 meters per second, Marcus said without hesitation. "But in a real combat situation, you'd need to account for atmospheric density variations and gravitational fluctuations from nearby stellar bodies." The classroom fell silent. Mrs. Patterson blinked in surprise. "That's correct, though we haven't covered stellar gravitational effects yet. We used physics calculations to target enemy ships," Marcus explained matter-of-factly. "If your math was wrong, people died." The student sitting next to him, a boy named Jake, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Dude, that's intense," he whispered. Marcus turned his attention back to the window, watching the peaceful suburban street beyond. Hover cars drifted by lazily. Children played in a nearby park. It all seemed so fragile, so unaware of how quickly everything could change. Just 6 months ago, those same streets had been filled with evacuation sirens and military transports rushing toward the space elevators. The Catherian War had lasted only 8 months, but it had changed everything. When the massive alien ships had appeared in Earth's solar system, demanding surrender and the right to harvest human neural tissue for their biocomputers, humanity had responded the way it always did when backed into a corner. They fought back with everything they had. Marcus had been 15 when the recruitment officers came to his high school. Most governments had laws against child soldiers, but when facing extinction, those laws became meaningless luxuries. The aliens had superior technology, but they had underestimated human adaptability and the lengths humans would go to protect their own. "The human brain," the Catherian commander had transmitted during the first diplomatic contact, "processes information in ways that make excellent organic processors. Your species will serve us well in this capacity." What the Catherians hadn't expected was that those same human brains could adapt, improvise, and think outside conventional parameters in ways their rigid society never could. Marcus had been one of thousands of teenagers who scored high on the military aptitude tests. Unlike adult soldiers who had years of thinking in conventional patterns, young humans could adapt to new technologies and tactics with frightening speed. The bell rang. Jolting Marcus from his memories, students began packing up their bags, chatting about weekend plans and upcoming tests. Marcus remained seated until the room mostly emptied, then stood and walked toward the door. "Mr. Chen," Mrs. Patterson called out, "could I speak with you for a moment?" Marcus stopped and turned back. The teacher looked concerned, the way adults always did when they tried to figure out how to handle him. "How are you adjusting to being back?" she asked gently. "Fine," Marcus replied, though they both knew it was a lie. "If you need anything, additional tutoring, counseling resources, you just need to ask. I know this transition must be difficult." Marcus nodded politely and left the classroom. In the hallway, clusters of students parted as he walked by. He caught fragments of whispered conversations. "That's the kid who destroyed the Catherian dreadnought. My dad says he killed like 1,000 aliens. I heard he got PTSD, and that's why they sent him back to school. None of it was entirely accurate, but Marcus had given up trying to correct the rumors. The truth was more complicated than any story they could imagine. He made his way to the cafeteria, where he grabbed a sandwich and found an empty table in the corner. The food was decent, but after months of military rations and emergency provisions, everything tasted too rich, too soft. He had learned to eat quickly and efficiently, always ready to move at a moment's notice. "Mind if we sit here?" Marcus looked up to see 3 students standing near his table. He recognized them from various classes, but had never spoken to any of them. There was Sarah, a girl from his English class who always asked thoughtful questions about the literature they read. Next to her stood David, a quiet kid who excelled in mathematics, and Maria, who had a reputation for being fiercely intelligent and unafraid to speak her mind. "Sure," Marcus said, gesturing to the empty chairs. They sat down, and for a moment nobody spoke. Finally, Maria broke the silence. "We wanted to thank you," she said, "for what you did out there." Marcus felt uncomfortable with the gratitude. "I did my job, just like everyone else." "No," David said quietly. "You did more than that. My cousin was on one of the evacuation ships from Proxima Station. He said if your unit hadn't held the line, none of them would have made it out." Marcus remembered Proxima Station. He remembered the taste of fear and desperation in the recycled air. He remembered making impossible decisions with lives hanging in the balance. He remembered watching good people die because he had to choose between saving 10 civilians or 100. "We've been reading about the war," Sarah added. "The official reports, the news articles, but they all make it sound so clean, like a chess match in space." "It wasn't clean," Marcus said simply. "We know," Maria replied. "That's why we wanted to talk to you. Everyone here treats you like you're either a hero or a freak. But you're just a person who went through something incredible and terrible, and now you're supposed to pretend it never happened and care about things like prom themes and college applications." Marcus studied their faces. Unlike most of their classmates, these 3 looked at him with genuine interest rather than fear or awe. "You want to know what it was really like?" They nodded. Marcus took a bite of his sandwich, considering how much to tell them. The Cytherians were unlike anything we had encountered before. Their technology was superior in almost every way, but they had one weakness. They couldn't understand human unpredictability. Everything in their society followed rigid patterns. When we did something that didn't make logical sense from their perspective, it confused them. "Like what?" David asked. "Like sacrificing strategic positions to save civilians. From a purely tactical standpoint, it made no sense. Resources should be allocated to maximize survival chances for the species as a whole, but humans don't work that way. We'll throw away military advantages to save people we care about, even when it seems irrational." "And that helped you win?" Sarah asked. "It's part of why we won. That and the fact that humans are really, really good at learning how to kill things that threaten us." Marcus paused. "The Cytherians expected us to fight like they did. Calculated, predictable, following logical progressions. Instead, we adapted their own weapons, turned their tactics against them, and did things that made no sense according to their strategic models." "What was the worst part?" Maria asked quietly. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "The responsibility. I was 16 years old, and I had to make decisions that got people killed. Good people. People with families and dreams and entire lives ahead of them. I had to choose who lived and who died, and I had to do it fast, under fire, with incomplete information." The table fell silent. Around them, the normal chaos of the cafeteria continued. Students complained about tests, planned weekend activities, and worried about social drama that seemed impossibly trivial to Marcus now. "How do you handle it?" David asked. "Coming back to all this?" Marcus gestured around the cafeteria. This is what we were fighting for. The right for people to worry about normal things, to live ordinary lives without fear. But it's hard to care about homework when you've seen planets burn. Have you talked to anyone? A counselor or therapist? Sarah asked. The military psychologists cleared me for return to civilian life, Marcus said. They said I'm handling the transition well. That's not what I asked. Marcus smiled slightly. It was the first genuine smile his classmates had seen from him since he returned. No, I haven't really talked to anyone about it. Maybe you should, Maria suggested. Not because there's something wrong with you, but because carrying all of that alone seems like too much for anyone. The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch period. Students began clearing their trays and heading to afternoon classes. Marcus stood up with the others, but Maria caught his arm. We eat lunch here every day, she said. If you want company, no pressure. Marcus nodded. I might take you up on that. As he walked to his next class, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in months, a small sense of connection to the world around him. For the first time since returning to Earth, he wondered if it might be possible to find his place in this peaceful world he had helped preserve. His next class was World History, taught by Mr. Rodriguez, a passionate teacher who had a gift for making past events feel immediate and relevant. Today's topic was the study of warfare throughout human civilization. War, Mr. Rodriguez began as students settled into their seats, has been a constant throughout human history. From the earliest tribal conflicts to the most recent galactic war, humans have consistently shown a remarkable ability to adapt their fighting strategies to overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. Marcus shifted in his seat. He had lived through history that was probably already being written about in textbooks. Can anyone give me an example of a time when a technologically inferior force defeated a superior enemy through innovative tactics? Mr. Rodriguez asked. Several hands went up. Students mentioned historical battles. David defeating Goliath, the American Revolution, various guerrilla wars throughout history. All excellent examples, the teacher said. But let's look at our most recent example, the Cytherian War. Who can tell me how humanity managed to defeat an enemy with superior technology and greater numbers? This time, fewer hands went up. The war was still fresh, still raw. Most students knew the basic facts, but not the detailed strategies that had led to victory. Marcus, Mr. Rodriguez said gently, would you be willing to share your perspective? All eyes turned to Marcus. He felt the familiar weight of attention, the expectation that he would provide some insight that would make everything clear and simple. But war was never simple. We didn't fight them the way they expected, Marcus said finally. The Cytherians had studied human military history, but they focused on our large-scale conflicts, world wars, major battles between organized armies. They prepared for that kind of fight. He paused, organizing his thoughts. Instead, we fought more like guerrillas, small units, hit-and-run tactics, using their own technology against them whenever possible. And we made decisions based on human values rather than pure strategic logic. Can you give us a specific example? A student asked. Marcus thought about Proxima Station again. There was a battle where the smart tactical choice would have been to let a civilian evacuation ship get destroyed in order to protect a military vessel that had better strategic value. The Cytherians made that calculation and focused their attack on the military ship, expecting us to do the same. But you didn't? No. We shifted our entire defense to protect the civilian ship. It left our military vessels vulnerable, and we lost some good ships and crews, but we saved 8,000 civilians, and the Cytherians were so confused by the choice that they made tactical errors trying to figure out what our real strategy was. That seems like a pretty big risk, another student commented. It was. But that's what humans do. We make choices that don't make perfect logical sense because we value things that can't be quantified. Love, loyalty, hope, The Catherians never figured out how to calculate for that. Mr. Rodriguez nodded approvingly. That's a perfect example of how cultural values can become strategic advantages. The very things that might seem like weaknesses in a purely logical framework became humanity's greatest strengths. The discussion continued, with students asking questions about specific battles and strategies. Marcus found himself engaged in a way he hadn't been in any of his other classes. Here, his experiences were relevant and valued, not just curiosities to be whispered about in hallways. When class ended, several students lingered to ask more questions. For the first time since returning to school, Marcus felt like he might actually have something to offer his classmates beyond just being a living reminder of the war. As he walked to his locker at the end of the day, Marcus reflected on how different this day had felt from his first week back at school. He was still struggling with the transition, still felt out of place among his peers, but maybe, just maybe, he was starting to find ways to bridge the gap between who he had been and who he was becoming. The war had changed him in ways that could never be undone, but perhaps that didn't mean he was broken or forever separated from normal life. Perhaps it meant he had something unique to contribute to the world he had helped save. Tomorrow, he decided, he would sit with Maria, David, and Sarah at lunch again. It was a small step, but it was a beginning. The gymnasium echoed with the sound of sneakers squeaking on polished floors and the sharp tweets of Coach Harrison's whistle. Physical education was mandatory for all students, and Marcus found himself reluctantly participating in what the other students called normal activities. Today was basketball, a game that seemed pointless and chaotic after the precise coordination required in military operations. "Chen, you're on the blue team," Coach Harrison called out, pointing toward a group of students who were already selecting their positions. Marcus joined the group, noting how the other players unconsciously gave him extra space. Jake, the boy from his physics class, offered him a nervous smile. "You ever play basketball before the war?" "Some," Marcus replied, though he didn't mention that the last time he had played any sport for fun was over 2 years ago. Everything since then had been military training exercises designed to keep soldiers in peak physical condition. The game began, and Marcus quickly realized how much his perspective had changed. While his teammates focused on scoring points and following the rules, Marcus found himself analyzing the court like a battlefield. He identified optimal positions for controlling territory, calculated angles for maximum efficiency, and anticipated movements several plays ahead. When an opposing player attempted to steal the ball from him, Marcus reacted with reflexes honed by months of combat. His defensive move was swift, precise, and completely overwhelming for a casual game between teenagers. The other player stumbled backward, looking shocked and slightly frightened. "Whoa, man," the boy said. "It's just a game." Marcus realized he had responded with the intensity of someone defending his life. He forced himself to relax, to dial back the automatic responses that had kept him alive in space, but were entirely inappropriate here. "Sorry, still adjusting to different kinds of competition." The game continued, but the easy camaraderie that had existed among the players was gone. His teammates passed him the ball hesitantly, and the opposing team seemed wary of challenging him directly. Marcus tried to play more casually, but it felt wrong to deliberately perform below his capabilities. "Let me guess," a voice said behind him as he sat on the bench during a break. "You're used to games where losing meant something more serious than running laps." Marcus turned to see Emily Watson, a senior who had a reputation for being observant and direct. She was also known for her academic excellence and her tendency to ask uncomfortable questions that cut straight to the heart of matters. "Something like that," Marcus agreed. Emily sat down beside him, ignoring the curious looks from other students. "My older brother was in the war, too. Marines, attached to the 3rd Fleet. He came back 3 months before you did." "How's he adjusting?" Badly, Emily said honestly. He tries to pretend everything's normal, but he can't sleep through the night, and he gets angry over things that used to never bother him. Yesterday, he yelled at my mom because she rearranged the kitchen cabinets, not because he was really mad about the cabinets, but because not knowing where everything was made him feel like he couldn't control his environment. Marcus nodded. He understood that feeling perfectly. Since returning home, he had rearranged his bedroom 3 times, always ensuring he had clear sight lines to the door and window and that potential weapons were within easy reach. The thing is, Emily continued, everyone expects him to just snap back to being the person he was before. But that person doesn't exist anymore. The war changed him, and not all of those changes are bad. He's more focused now, more aware of what really matters. But nobody wants to acknowledge that. What does he do about it? He found a support group, other veterans who understand what he went through. They meet twice a week and just talk about the transition. It seems to help. Marcus considered this information. The military counselors had mentioned support groups, but he had dismissed the idea. He preferred handling problems on his own, the way he had learned to do during the war. But perhaps isolation wasn't the best strategy for every situation. The whistle blew, signaling the end of class. As students headed toward the locker rooms, Emily stood up. If you're interested, I can get you the information about the group. No pressure. Thanks, Marcus said. I'll think about it. The rest of the afternoon passed uneventfully. Marcus attended chemistry class, where he found the lab work straightforward but uninspiring after working with exotic alien technologies. Then came English literature, where they were reading a novel about soldiers returning from an ancient Earth war. The parallels were uncomfortable, but not entirely unwelcome. After school, instead of going straight home, Marcus decided to walk through the downtown area. The streets were busy with after-work traffic, and students from various schools heading home or to part-time jobs. Everything looked peaceful and prosperous, exactly the kind of life humanity had been fighting to preserve. He stopped at a small park and sat on a bench, watching children play on the swings and slides. Their laughter and carefree movements reminded him of something Captain Torres had said during their final mission briefing. Remember, we're not just fighting for survival. We're fighting for the right of human children to grow up in a world where their biggest worry is whether they'll make the soccer team. Marcus? Marcus Chan? He turned to see a woman approaching the bench. She was in her 30s, wearing a business suit and carrying a tablet. Something about her posture and the way she moved suggested military training. I'm sorry to bother you, she said. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell, retired. I served with the 4th Orbital Division during the war. Marcus stood up respectfully. Even though he was technically a civilian now, old habits remained strong. Ma'am. Please, just Sarah. I'm not your commanding officer. She gestured to the bench. Mind if I sit? I've been hoping to run into you. They sat down together, and Sarah studied Marcus's face carefully. You look tired. Not physically tired. Soul tired. I'm managing, Marcus replied automatically. I'm sure you are. You wouldn't have survived what you did if you weren't good at managing difficult situations. But managing and thriving are 2 different things. Sarah pointed toward the children playing in the park. When I first came back, I couldn't understand why any of this mattered. Soccer games, school dances, arguments about movie preferences. It all seemed so trivial after watching planets burn. How did you get past that feeling? I realized that the triviality was the point. We fought so that people could afford to worry about trivial things. The fact that teenagers can spend hours debating which movie to watch instead of worrying about whether they'll survive the night is a victory. Marcus watched a small girl teaching her younger brother how to use the monkey bars, patiently encouraging him through each attempt. But it's hard to care about homework when you've seen what really matters. True. But here's what I learned. Those everyday concerns aren't meaningless. They're the building blocks of the life we preserved. A society where young people can focus on education, relationships, and personal growth instead of survival is exactly what we were trying to protect. So I should pretend to care about things I know don't matter? No, Sarah said firmly. You should find ways to make them matter. Use the skills and perspective you gained during the war to contribute something valuable to this peaceful world. A frisbee landed near their feet, thrown by a group of college students playing nearby. Marcus picked it up and threw it back with casual precision. The throw was perfectly calibrated, traveling exactly the right distance with optimal efficiency. The student who caught it looked impressed and called out his thanks. "See," Sarah said, "even something as simple as throwing a frisbee becomes different when you apply the kind of focus and precision you learned in the military. You're not the same person you were before the war, but that doesn't mean you can't find your place in this world." Did you ever regret coming back? Sarah was quiet for a moment. There were times I missed the clarity of military life. When your primary job is to protect humanity from extinction, your purpose is crystal clear. Civilian life is messier, more ambiguous. But I came to realize that the complexity is part of what makes it worth protecting. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the evening light fade across the park. Finally, Sarah reached into her briefcase and pulled out a business card. "I run a consulting firm now. We help companies develop contingency plans for various crisis scenarios. A lot of our clients are space-based operations who want to be prepared for potential threats. The work uses military strategic thinking, but applies it to civilian problems." She handed Marcus the card. "If you're interested in finding ways to use your experience constructively, give me a call. We could use someone with your background and perspective." Marcus studied the card. "You want me to help people prepare for wars?" "I want to help you find ways to make your experience meaningful in peacetime, teaching others how to think strategically, how to prepare for contingencies, how to make difficult decisions under pressure. These are valuable skills in many civilian contexts." After Sarah left, Marcus remained in the park as darkness settled around him. He thought about his conversation with Emily, about her brother's struggles and the support group. He thought about Sarah's offer and the possibility of finding work that used his military experience constructively. For the first time since returning to Earth, he began to see potential paths forward that didn't require him to pretend the war had never happened. The next morning at school, Marcus made a decision. Instead of sitting alone, he sought out Maria, David, and Sarah at their lunch table. When he approached with his tray, they looked up with genuine smiles. "Good to see you again," Maria said, moving her books to make room for him. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday," Marcus began. "About talking to someone." "And?" David prompted. "I'm going to look into that support group Emily mentioned, and maybe some other options too." "That's great," Sarah said. "It takes courage to admit you need help." "It's not about needing help," Marcus corrected. "It's about finding the right way to move forward. I can't go back to being who I was before the war, but I can work on becoming someone new who incorporates both experiences." "What do you mean?" Maria asked. Marcus took a bite of his sandwich while organizing his thoughts. "Yesterday, a former officer told me that the goal isn't to forget what happened or pretend it doesn't matter. The goal is to find ways to make those experiences contribute something positive to the world we helped preserve." "Like what?" "Like teaching people how to think strategically, how to prepare for problems, how to make tough decisions. The war taught me things that could be valuable in civilian contexts, too." Over the following weeks, Marcus began to implement this new approach to his reintegration. He attended his first support group meeting and found it both challenging and helpful. Listening to other veterans describe their struggles made him feel less alone, and sharing his own experiences helped him process emotions he had been suppressing. He also called Sarah Mitchell and arranged to visit her consulting firm. The work was interesting and allowed him to use his military training in ways that felt constructive rather than destructive. He started as a part-time intern, analyzing potential security vulnerabilities for civilian installations. At school, his relationships with classmates gradually improved. Instead of seeing him only as an intimidating reminder of the war, they began to appreciate the unique perspective he could offer. In group projects, his strategic thinking and leadership skills proved valuable. In discussions about current events or ethical dilemmas, his experience with real-world consequences added depth to conversations. The change wasn't immediate or complete. Marcus still struggled with nightmares, still felt disconnected from many typical teenage concerns, still carried the weight of decisions made in combat. But he was beginning to build a new identity that honored both his past and his future. One afternoon, while working on a chemistry lab with Jake, his former classmate made an observation that surprised them both. "You know," Jake said as they calibrated their equipment, "when you first came back, everyone was kind of afraid of you. But now I think people are starting to realize that having someone around who's been through what you have isn't scary. It's actually kind of reassuring." "How so?" "Like if something really bad happened, we know there's someone here who would know what to do. Someone who's proven they can handle impossible situations and still protect people." Marcus considered this perspective. Perhaps his role in this peaceful world wasn't to hide his experiences, but to serve as a bridge between the harsh realities he had faced and the protected environment he had helped preserve. That evening, as he walked home from school, Marcus passed the same park where he had spoken with Sarah weeks earlier. The children were still playing, still laughing, still growing up in a world where their greatest concerns were homework assignments and friendship drama. For the first time since coming home, Marcus felt genuinely grateful to be part of preserving that innocence. His war might be over, but his mission to protect and serve had simply taken a different form. 2 months later, Marcus was beginning to feel like he might actually belong in this civilian world when everything changed again. It started with an emergency alert on every communication device in the school during third-period chemistry class. "Attention! This is not a drill. Unknown vessels have been detected approaching Earth's outer defense perimeter. All civilian populations should remain calm and follow local emergency protocols." The classroom fell silent except for the hum of ventilation systems. Mrs. Henderson, the chemistry teacher, stared at her tablet with growing concern. Students began checking their own devices, sharing worried glances and whispered questions. "Are those the Cytherians again?" someone asked. "I thought we beat them," another student said. Marcus felt his body automatically shift into combat readiness mode. His breathing became controlled and efficient. His mind began calculating possibilities, threat assessments, and potential response strategies. All the progress he had made toward feeling normal evaporated in an instant. "Everyone needs to stay calm," Mrs. Henderson announced, though her own voice betrayed her anxiety. "We should continue with our lesson until we receive further instructions." But continuing with chemistry equations became impossible as more alerts began flooding their devices. News feeds showed images of sleek, unfamiliar ships moving through the asteroid belt. These weren't Cytherian vessels. The hull designs were completely different, featuring organic curves and what appeared to be bioluminescent markings. Marcus studied the images on his tablet, his military training automatically analyzing the ship's configurations. The vessels showed signs of advanced propulsion technology and defensive capabilities, but their approach pattern was cautious rather than aggressive. Most invasion forces would move in tight attack formations. These ships were maintaining diplomatic spacing. Marcus, Jake leaned over from the next lab table. "What do you think? Are we in trouble again?" Before Marcus could answer, Principal Williams's voice crackled over the school intercom system. "All students and staff, please report to the gymnasium immediately for an emergency assembly. Move quickly, but remain orderly." The hallways filled with nervous chatter as students and teachers made their way to the gym. Marcus found himself naturally falling into a protective formation around some of the younger students, his instincts taking over despite his efforts to remain a normal teenager. In the gymnasium, Principal Williams stood at the center of the basketball court with a portable communication device. Behind him, a large screen displayed incoming transmissions from Earth's orbital defense stations. "Students and staff," the principal began, "we have received word that the approaching vessels have initiated contact with Earth's diplomatic corps. Early indications suggest this is not an invasion force. However, as a precautionary measure, we are implementing emergency protocols." The large screen flickered and displayed what appeared to be the bridge of one of the unknown ships. The being that appeared was humanoid but clearly alien. Its skin had a slight blue-green tint, and its eyes were larger than human normal, but its posture and movements seemed peaceful. "People of Earth," the alien spoke in heavily accented but understandable English. "I am Commander Zayeth of the Valen Republic. We come not as conquerors but as allies. We have traveled far to offer assistance to the species that defeated the Kytherian Empire." Murmurs of surprise rippled through the gymnasium. Marcus felt a mixture of relief and confusion. In all his military briefings, no one had mentioned other intelligent species being threatened by the Kytherians. "Your species' victory over the Kytherians has freed several worlds from their influence," Commander Zayeth continued. "However, our intelligence suggests that the Kytherian defeat was not as complete as your leaders believe. Surviving Kytherian forces have regrouped in the Andromeda sector and are preparing for a return invasion, likely within the next 2 Earth years." The relief Marcus had felt moments earlier transformed into cold determination. He had hoped the war was truly over, but some part of him had always suspected that an enemy as advanced as the Kytherians wouldn't be defeated so easily. "We offer our technology, our knowledge, and our alliance in preparing for this threat," the Valen commander said, "but we must work together. The Kytherians will return stronger and better prepared for human unpredictability." The transmission ended, and the gymnasium erupted in discussions. Teachers tried to maintain order while students processed this new information. Marcus noticed that many of his classmates were looking in his direction, as if expecting him to have answers. Principal Williams called for quiet. "We will be dismissing early today so that families can stay together while our governments work out the details of this situation. Please proceed to your lockers in an orderly fashion and wait for your transportation home." As students began filing out of the gymnasium, Marcus felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Mr. Rodriguez, his history teacher. "Marcus, there are some people here who would like to speak with you," he said quietly. In the main office, Marcus found 3 adults waiting for him. 2 wore military uniforms he recognized from Earth's Space Defense Force. The third was wearing civilian clothes but carried herself with the bearing of a veteran officer. "Marcus Chen," the civilian said, extending her hand. "I'm Commander Janet Price, retired from the Navy, currently working with the Diplomatic Corps. We need to talk." They moved to a private conference room where Commander Price activated a signal dampener to ensure their conversation remained secure. "The Valens have specifically requested to meet with several veterans from the Kytherian War," she began. "They want to understand how humans were able to defeat an enemy they've been fighting unsuccessfully for over a century. Your name was at the top of their list." "Why me specifically?" Marcus asked. "Because your tactical innovations at Proxima Station and the Meridian Offensive represent exactly the kind of human thinking they need to understand. The Valens are excellent strategists, but they think in very logical, predictable patterns. They need to learn how human unpredictability can become a tactical advantage. Marcus considered this request. Part of him was relieved to discover that his military experience might be valuable again. The transition to civilian life had been challenging, and while he was making progress, he still felt most confident when he could contribute to protecting others. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "We want you to work as a consultant with the Joint Human-Valen Strategic Planning Committee. You would help analyze Catherian capabilities and develop new tactics for the next conflict. The work would be part-time, allowing you to continue your education, but it would give you a chance to use your experience constructively." "Are you sure the Catherians are coming back?" Marcus asked. "The Valens could be wrong. Our deep space monitoring stations have detected signs of ship construction in the Andromeda sector," one of the military officers replied. "The energy signatures match Catherian technology. They're definitely building something big." Marcus thought about his classmates, his teachers, the children playing in the park. The peaceful life he had been struggling to adapt to was threatened again. But this time, instead of feeling overwhelmed by the responsibility, he felt ready to meet the challenge. "I'll do it," he decided, "but I have conditions." "Name them." "First, I want to continue attending school and maintain my relationships here. This work can't consume my entire life the way the last war did. Second, I want other veterans included in the planning process. The innovations that worked before came from multiple perspectives, not just mine. Third, I want regular communication with my support group and counseling resources. I've learned that isolation isn't an effective strategy for long-term success." Commander Price smiled. "Those are excellent conditions. In fact, they demonstrate exactly the kind of mature thinking we need for this project." Over the following weeks, Marcus found himself balancing an increasingly complex life. 3 days a week, he attended regular classes at school, continuing his relationships with classmates and working on normal teenage academic challenges. 2 days a week, he worked with the Joint Human-Valen Strategic Committee, analyzing enemy capabilities and developing new defensive strategies. The Valens proved to be fascinating allies. They were logical, methodical, and extremely intelligent, but they struggled to understand human emotional decision-making. Marcus found himself serving as a bridge between human intuition and Valen analysis. "Explain to me," Commander Zaith said during one planning session, "why humans will fight harder to protect civilians than to secure strategic resources?" Marcus thought carefully about his answer. "Because humans don't see resources and people as separate categories. Those civilians represent everything we value about our civilization. Our families, our culture, our future. Protecting them isn't just tactically important, it's the entire reason we fight." "But this emotional attachment makes you vulnerable," Zaith observed. "The Catherians could exploit it." "They tried that strategy last time," Marcus replied. "It didn't work because when humans get emotional about protecting something they love, we become more creative and more determined, not weaker." These sessions helped Marcus understand that his struggles with civilian life hadn't been a sign of failure. The skills and perspective he had developed during the war were genuinely valuable, both for preparing for future conflicts and for contributing to peaceful society. At school, his classmates gradually learned about his new role. Rather than treating him as an outsider, many began seeking his perspective on current events and strategic thinking problems. Marcus discovered that teaching others to think analytically and prepare for challenges was deeply satisfying. "It's weird," Maria commented during one of their lunch conversations. "A few months ago, you seemed like someone who was stuck between two different worlds. Now you seem like someone who's figured out how to live in both worlds at the same time." "I think the key was realizing that they don't have to be separate worlds," Marcus replied. "The skills I learned during the war, strategic thinking, crisis management, working under pressure, those are valuable in civilian life too. And the connections I've made here, the relationships and support systems, those make me more effective in military contexts. So when the Catherians come back, you'll be ready?" David asked. "We'll be ready," Marcus corrected. "That's the difference this time. Instead of trying to fight the war alone while everyone else goes about their normal lives, we're building a society where military preparedness and civilian life support each other." As spring arrived, Marcus reflected on how much had changed since his difficult first days back at school. He was still a teenager dealing with the after-effects of trauma and the challenges of growing up. But he was also a valued contributor to Earth's defense planning and a bridge between military and civilian perspectives. The war had changed him in permanent ways, but he had learned to see those changes as expansions rather than limitations. He could never again be the innocent 15-year-old who had volunteered for military service, but he could be something new. A young adult who understood both the realities of conflict and the importance of peace. One afternoon, while walking home from a strategic planning session, Marcus passed the same park where he had spoken with Sarah Mitchell months earlier. The children were still playing, still laughing, still growing up secure in their protected world. But now Marcus saw additional details: the discrete security sensors that monitored for potential threats, the emergency communication systems that could coordinate rapid evacuations if necessary, the trained civilian volunteers who knew how to assist with crisis response. The peaceful world he had fought to protect was still peaceful, but it was also prepared. And Marcus had found his place not as someone struggling to choose between military service and civilian life, but as someone who could help strengthen both. When the Catherians returned, humanity would be ready with a response that combined military effectiveness with civilian resilience. And Marcus would be exactly where he belonged, serving as a bridge between the warrior he had been and the leader he was becoming, helping to protect a world that had learned to value both peace and preparedness. The war had taught him that humans could adapt to any challenge. The peace had taught him that adaptation didn't mean abandoning who he was or what he had learned. It meant growing into someone who could use every experience to contribute something valuable to the world he called home.